When you first read the title of this video, you might have thought it was referring to this scene, the famed blue sweater scene.
And you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance.
Which is a great scene, don't get me wrong, but there are enough videos about that one. Maybe you're thinking it's the scene where Miranda reveals her impending divorce.
Snow Queen drives away another Mr. Priestley.
Or maybe Nigel's rebuke of Andy's work ethic.
Because this place, where so many people would die to work, you only deign to work.
Or the final scene in the car in Paris.
Everybody wants to be us.
All great scenes, 10 out of 10. But no, the one that really fascinates me is this one. The conference room scene.
February, back of the issue.
Miranda Priestley meets with her senior staff. They suggest ideas for the upcoming issue, and she rejects them.
No.
It's not a particularly noteworthy scene. It's only 2 minutes long, and only one of its lines has been made into a meme.
Florals for spring. Groundbreaking.
As scenes go, it's pretty routine. Except for one thing. Where is Andy? Andy, or Andrea, as played by Anne Hathaway, is our lead character. She's our fish out of water, the lens through which we view the world of Runway and Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley. Andy is present in every scene, literally every single one. Except this one. The entire plot of the film hinges on the relationship between Andy and Miranda. Even in scenes where Andy is not the target of Miranda's malevolent machinations, she's still present to observe and react to her. So why feature a scene about Miranda, which doesn't affect Andy at all? In the script, this scene is numbered 119A, suggesting it wasn't in the original shooting script and was added later. What's more, according to director David Frankel,
this was a sequence that was actually much shorter in the screenplay, in which we expanded on the day we shot. Aline wrote some additional dialogue.
What was so essential about this scene that compelled them to include and develop it? It doesn't further the plot in any significant way. There are two sort of story beats. The first is Emily's illness. At the end of the scene, she appears coughing and sniffling. This leads to Andy being forced to attend a work event and missing her boyfriend's birthday party.
I thought that only the first assistant went to the benefit.
Only when the first assistant hasn't decided to become an incubus of viral plague.
But Emily isn't present for the bulk of the scene either. She has to enter the room in order to establish this detail, which is re-established in the next scene anyway.
How's the cold doing? Like death warmed up.
You don't need the conference room scene to get this point across. It can't be what the scene was invented for. The other story beat belongs to Nigel. While every other suggestion is rejected, Nigel is the only person present who receives Miranda's approval.
Zach Posen's doing some very sculptural suits, so I suggested that Testino shoot them at the Noguchi Garden.
Perfect. Thank God somebody came to work today.
This is part of a running thread that Nigel is the only person who consistently impresses Miranda. They seem to be on the same wavelength.
But do you think it's too much like...
Like a La Croix from July? I thought that, but no, not with the right accessories. It should work.
He's not intimidated by her. You might actually call them friends. So when she saves her own neck by giving her rival a dream job she'd already promised to Nigel...
When the time is right, she'll pay me back.
These little touches make the betrayal hit that much harder.
You sure about that?
Most of Nigel's scenes are with Andy rather than Miranda, so I can buy this scene as an excuse to give them more screen time together, reinforcing the nature of their relationship. But, like Emily, the bulk of the scene is not about Nigel. He has one line and a few sassy reaction shots. The scene was an opportunity they used to tell some of his story, but it's not his scene. Okay, so if the scene isn't about narrative, then it must be about character. So what is this scene telling us about Miranda that we don't already know? On my first watch, I assumed this scene was a thinly veiled excuse for Miranda to abuse her underlings for our amusement, and that's all.
That's all.
That's all? Don't you know what this is?
But the truth is, there's more to it than that. The more I examine this scene, the more I realise it exemplifies precisely what is so great about this film. The Devil Wears Prada was incredibly influential. It inspired a whole host of copycats. It launched Emily Blunt's career. It sold Anne Hathaway as an actress for adult dramas. The movie was in production before the original novel was finished, and it's still being quoted 15 years later. Wait, it's been 15 years? But above all, The Devil Wears Prada is a fascinating example of how to do adaptation well. At a glance, the film and the novel are fairly similar. They share a lot of the same DNA. The larger set pieces, Paris delivering the book, the love triangle with Christian, the Harry Potter manuscript, are all lifted practically wholesale. Many of the smaller touches, too, are directly from the novel. The coats on the desk, the beeping phone, Miranda forgetting Andy's name, as well as some of the more choice quotes.
A million girls would kill for this job.
Bore someone else with your questions. That's all, that's all, that's all.
And yet, the film tells the same story in a very different way. For starters, Andy's emotional arc is more complicated than in the novel, though they both take a similar shape. Both start with Andy as an aspiring writer who knows nothing about fashion, accepting the job as Miranda's assistant because of future opportunities it could lead to.
Being Miranda's assistant opens a lot of doors.
However, she quickly learns her new boss is demanding, rude, and impossible to please, subjecting Andy to a series of increasing indignities and outright abuse. In the book, Andy responds to this with mounting incredulity.
I still don't believe she expects me to do this.
She reaches this emotional plateau fairly early, and remains there until the very end. With each trial she faces, her feelings don't change, they just intensify.
Oh my god, this wasn't happening. I would surely wake up in my own unglamorous negative thread count sheeted bed in just a minute and discover that the entire day, hell, the entire year, had just been a particularly horrid dream.
For book Andy, the job is something she is subjected to. For film Andy, it's something she responds to. For the first half of the film, whenever Andy is met with a new and greater challenge, she fails, and is subsequently punished. However, she pushes through the punishment, learns, and ends up exceeding Miranda's expectations. By the second half, she stops failing. She overcomes each new challenge and is rewarded professionally, instead paying the price in her personal life. Both versions of Andy decide to embrace fashion, but for different reasons. Book Andy does it out of peer pressure.
12 miserable long weeks of feeling stupid, incompetent, and all around moronic. And so I decided at the beginning of my 4th month of runway to be a new woman and start dressing the part.
Film Andy does it because she realizes failing to engage with the industry she works in is making her bad at the job.
Andy, be serious. You are not trying. You have no idea how many legends have walked these halls, and what's worse, you don't care.
Okay, so I'm screwing it up.
In the end, both versions of Andy attend Paris Fashion Week in Emily's stead. For book Andy, this is a cruel twist of fate. Emily contracts mono, and only when her doctor convinces Miranda that it's a real disease does Miranda decide to take Andy instead.
She said something about the assistants they give her abroad being idiots, and that even you'd be better to have around than them.
Film Andy replaces Emily because she has surpassed her professionally, which Miranda recognizes.
I need the best possible team with me. That no longer includes Emily.
So while both versions of Andy end up in the same narrative place, the places they are emotionally couldn't be more different. Book Andy's antipathy towards Miranda has only grown.
F her, f Paris, and fashion shows and marathon games of I'm so fat. F all the people who believed that Miranda's behavior was justified because she could pair a talented photographer with some expensive clothes and walk away with some pretty magazine pages.
Whereas Film Andy's opinion of Miranda has progressed in the complete opposite direction.
She is vicious. Oh, and you know she called me Andrea? I mean, she didn't call me Emily, isn't that great? Okay, she's tough, but if Miranda were a man, no one would notice anything about her except how great she is at her job.
Miranda will be devastated. Her whole life is about runway. He can't do that to her.
And yet, when Andy quits, both versions do it for the same reason. However, even though both versions are making the same point, they're not exactly saying the same thing. Book Andy learns her terrible roommate has entered a coma after a bad car accident. Despite pressure from her family, she initially decides to remain in Paris. But when Miranda finds out, Andy is disturbed by the way she praises Andy for her commitment to her career.
In a move that was so fundamentally out of character for this woman on every level, she placed her hand on top of the one I had resting on the seat between us and said, "You remind me of myself when I was your age."
Whilst reeling from this unexpected endorsement, and grappling with the worry for her roommate and a crippling headache, Andy is pushed one indignity too far. When Miranda makes a demand that is truly impossible, renewing her daughter's expired passports less than 3 hours before their flight, Andy snaps.
There's a small chance I wouldn't have gotten fired if I'd immediately pleaded and explained and lost the defiant attitude, but I couldn't seem to muster one single tiny shred of self-control. Andrea, you realize what you're doing, do you not? You do know that if you simply leave here like this, I'm going to be forced to f*** you, Miranda. F*** you.
The way film Andy quits is one of the larger departures from the book. She learns of a coup against Miranda and attempts to defend her, only to learn that Miranda has already protected herself by betraying Nigel. Nevertheless, Miranda praises Andy for her loyalty.
I see a great deal of myself in you.
Like book Andy, film Andy is distressed by the comparison.
What if I don't want to live the way you live?
Both Andys quit out of a fear the job is turning them into Miranda. But with book Andy, I don't feel there's much danger of that. Though she has overvalued her career, she quits because there is a line she will not cross. Throughout the course of the book, she gets better at dealing with the job, but doesn't really get better at doing it. That's partly because book Miranda has impossible expectations that nobody could ever meet, but also because book Andy never fully compromises her identity for the sake of the job.
Don't think I haven't noticed your lack of enthusiasm or those sighs or faces you make when I ask you to do something you quite obviously don't feel like doing.
Film Andy has compromised. She has changed. Her fear is not of what she might become, but of what she has become already.
I couldn't do what you did to Nigel, Miranda. I couldn't do something like that. You already did. To Emily.
It's not quite the same as Miranda's betrayal, but it's much more convincing as a step on the road to becoming Miranda. This frightens film Andy, not because she hates her, but because she has seen the life Miranda lives and realizes it's not the life she wants.
This is a little bit less about a sadistic person picking on someone else, and it's a little bit more of a Faust story.
Book Andy is tortured by the devil. Film Andy makes a deal with her. So, let's talk about the devil. In the book, Miranda is undoubtedly a bad manager. She gives tasks with incomplete information and refuses to answer follow-up questions. She has a poor memory, but gaslights others into thinking their recollection is at fault. She is supremely wasteful, throwing money at expensive dinners she doesn't eat and stockpiling designer scarves she keeps losing. Reduced to one key fault, she is disconnected from reality.
Miranda didn't seem to understand that the latte I presented to her each morning could not only not be delivered, but could easily take half an hour at prime time to purchase. She spent 20 minutes refusing to believe that there wasn't a single plane available. I assured her that it wasn't that they were all taken, just that it was a difficult time of night to be attempting to charter a flight. I cannot f***ing pull a run-through together in 30 seconds, do you understand me? It's f***ing impossible.
Film Miranda shares some of this lack of awareness.
Please, it's just, I don't know, drizzling.
But for the most part, she seems to know exactly what she's doing. When she sets truly impossible tasks, she does it as a punishment.
You want the unpublished manuscript?
Well, we know everyone in publishing. It shouldn't be a problem, should it? And you can do anything, right?
When she gaslights, it's a sort of power play.
What's that? Oh, I don't want that. I'm having lunch with Irv. I'll be back at 3. I'd like my Starbucks waiting. And if you don't have that Harry Potter book by then, don't even bother coming back.
And when she misremembers Andy's name, it's not because she doesn't realize she's doing it, she simply doesn't care to learn it.
There you are, Emily. How many times do I have to scream your name?
Actually, it's Andy.
Did de Marchelier confirm?
De Marchelier.
De Marchelier? Did he get him on the phone?
Okay.
And Emily?
Yes?
That's all.
Film Miranda is not disconnected from reality. She simply insists on reality conforming to her exacting standards. The only times book Miranda is suggested to be aware of the effects she has on people is when Andy suspects her behavior is born out of a sadistic pleasure.
She'd called to drive me a little crazier, push me a little bit harder. She'd called to dare me to defy her. She'd called to make me hate her that much more.
But Film Miranda isn't malicious. Not really. She certainly doesn't care if she hurts people's feelings, just as she doesn't care about making people feel appreciated. All she cares about is the magazine.
I really do think that she stabs everybody in the back at the end to stay there, really not because it's what she wants selfishly, but what she's telling herself is this is what's best for runway, and what's best for runway is best for fashion, and what's best for fashion is what's best for everybody.
If Film Miranda were reduced to one key fault, it would be perfectionism. The unreasonable expectations she has for her staff are the same expectations she has for herself. She believes she's doing something that really matters, and all the people in her life are either a help or a hindrance. Every setback, whether it's an entire clothing line that's not up to standard, or her assistant taking a little too long to bring what she asked for.
By all means, move at a glacial pace. You know how that thrills me.
It's getting in the way of her doing what she needs to do.
I think when you're a taskmaster and very, very disciplined and controlling, that everything is not quite right all the time. There are moments of satisfaction when work is done correctly, and that's always surprising, but generally you're dissatisfied.
Miranda Priestley is good at her job. The novel makes this clear.
Miranda was, as far as I could tell, a truly fantastic editor. Runway wouldn't be Runway. Hell, it wouldn't be much of anything at all without Miranda Priestley.
However, the novel also questions how valuable that job is.
Why was the ability to put together a Balmain evening gown and a brooding, leggy Asian girl on a side street in San Sebastian worshipped so much that Miranda wasn't accountable for her behavior?
In the film, Andy also questions this.
They all act like they're curing cancer or something. The amount of time and energy that these people spend on these insignificant, minute details, and for what? So that tomorrow they can spend another $300,000 reshooting something that was probably fine to begin with to sell people things they don't need. What?
But the film doesn't entirely agree with her. On numerous occasions, it makes the case for the value of the fashion industry.
And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room.
And what they did, what they created, was greater than art. Because you live your life in it.
The film doesn't require you to agree, but it wants you to take the fashion industry seriously. In the film, the magazine matters.
This is not just a magazine. This is a shining beacon of hope for, let's say, a young boy growing up in Rhode Island with 6 brothers, pretending to go to soccer practice when he was really going to sewing class and reading Runway under the covers at night with a flashlight.
The novel suggests Miranda's job is not particularly challenging.
I'd yet to catch her doing anything that even resembled work, including such pedestrian tasks as answering the phone, moving a jacket from a closet, or pouring a glass of water.
Whereas the film goes out of its way to show Miranda at work. When she's giving instructions, she's working. When she's delivering a monologue, she's working. When she's reeling from heartbreak, she's working. Any spare moment Miranda has, she spends working.
Meryl makes the choice to work through this entire scene, to look through the book, through the whole scene, even though she's asking something rather momentous. I think that's a really good choice to show that it just never stops for Miranda. She doesn't have a moment to waste.
Now, there are plenty of op-eds about how Meryl Streep basically made this film, and I think that's a little unfair to the rest of the creative team. Filmmaking is a collaborative process. No creative decision is carried out by any single person. If Meryl's ideas worked, it's because the film had a good creative team. Director David Frankel initially passed on the film because it had been written as a revenge story. He and screenwriter Aileen Brosh McKenna reinvented it together because they shared a strong vision. They are the ones who wanted Meryl to play the part. Nevertheless, Streep's influence on this film should not be understated. Miranda's iconic hairstyle was Meryl's idea, so Miranda could be picked out in a crowd. The hotel room scene? Also Meryl's idea, to see the woman behind the businesswoman. The famed blue sweater scene wasn't Meryl's idea, but she encouraged the scene to be expanded, and it was she who chose the shade cerulean. And the way Miranda is constantly at work, that was Meryl's idea.
Well, seeing Miranda do her job and seeing Miranda at work was an important change that Meryl made in the development of the script.
And it is this idea which brings us back to...
It came from Meryl's imperative to see Miranda at work, and I thought it might be really fun to shoot a whole editorial meeting.
On some level, it is true the conference room scene exists simply because it's entertaining to watch Miranda abuse her staff. But it also tells us a lot about what Miranda is like as an editor. She's rude and ruthless, yes, but she doesn't reject anything without good reason. Either it's cliché,
Laurels for spring.
or it's been done before.
No, we did that 2 years ago. What else?
Which, it should be noted, she remembers off the top of her head. Or it's simply because it does not meet the proper standard for Runway magazine.
Not wonderful yet. It's dull. No.
And that standard is not impossible to achieve. She gives credit where it's due.
Perfect.
In 2 minutes, we learn more about why Miranda is good at her job than we ever do in the novel. And this is more than a bit of flavor text. Miranda's skill is an important thing for an audience to understand, because it influences how the film is read. The conference room scene sits slap bang in the middle of the runtime, bridging the gap between the two halves of the second act. This is the point where Andy stops failing, where she surpasses Emily, where she begins to respect Miranda. It's subtle, but this scene also shifts our own perspective of Miranda. Without it, Andy's change would be harder to comprehend. What's more, the conference room scene is crucial to our reading of the film's climax.
Truth is, there is no one that can do what I do, including her. Any of the other choices would have found that job impossible, and the magazine would have suffered.
This isn't vanity speaking, it's true. And we believe it's true because we've seen it for ourselves. Without the conference room scene, Miranda's betrayal might come across as the selfish act of an egomaniac. With the conference room scene, it becomes a ruthless choice, done for the sake of the magazine. It's probably clear by this point that I regard the film as far superior to the novel. That said, I will defend the novel to a degree. It's a solid starting point the film expanded on, and author Lauren Weisberger worked with the filmmakers to make that happen. By itself, the novel is achieving different things to the film. It's clearly meant as a criticism of Vogue editor Anna Wintour. She's name-checked twice in the novel, and Weisberger worked as her assistant, so the comparison is pretty undeniable. As a piece of gossipy, bitchy fun, I can see the book's appeal. It's a revenge fantasy, and it's relatable. Who hasn't wanted to tell their boss to f*** off? I don't think the Miranda Priestley of the book is a bad character. I can't say how accurately she mirrors Anna Wintour. I'd recommend watching the September issue for some insight on that. But there are definitely managers like Book Miranda in the real world. Inept, oblivious, self-important narcissists celebrated for their status and not their skill. I believe these people are very deserving of ridicule. Power to the book for doing that. Having said all this, the book takes rather a narrow view of Miranda. It's the view of an assistant. The book is written entirely in Andy's first-person perspective. She may catch glimpses of Miranda's professional life, but ultimately, she's not involved. She can speculate about it better than most, but that doesn't mean she's privy to what running a successful magazine entails. The film, though couched heavily in Andy's perspective, is not bound by the same limitation. The conference room scene proves this. As a result, the film presents a broader view of Miranda. Critical but sympathetic. Respectful but honest. It's a more nuanced character study.
It's not a happy woman. It's an accomplished woman. Yeah. It's a different thing.
Through Miranda, the film explores more ideas than the book does. The cutthroat nature of the corporate world, intimidation as a toxic but effective motivator, and the things women must sacrifice for success. Instead of a suffering employee versus a bad boss, Andy and Miranda come to represent a clash of ideologies, between a person who will pay any price to stay in that world, and a person who won't. Instead of quitting in a fit of pique, this Andy and Miranda part as equals. I don't think the filmmakers fully realised the value of the conference room scene when they shot it. Reading about the behind the scenes, it's clear this was a film they discovered whilst they were making it. But when you have a strong idea at the heart of a project, as well as a team of talented artists who share that idea, it will appear in the finer details just as much as the broad strokes. Sometimes it is the small things that make the big thing. Subtleties that influence you in almost unnoticeable ways can be the difference between a good story and a great one. So while it's only good and proper the blue sweater scene gets the credit it's due, I think it's just as important to appreciate the film's less obvious accomplishments. That's all. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment. If you want to support the channel, consider donating to my Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/JamesWoodall, or follow me on Twitter @JamesBWoodall for updates on future videos. Thanks for watching.